Strikes on Karg Island, oil prices spiking. Strikes on Karg Island, oil prices spiking, and a presidential deadline now 11 hours away threatening to destroy what he calls a whole civilization unless Iran reopens the Strait of Hormuz. Karg Island handles roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports. It's at the northern edge of the Persian Gulf, just off Iran's southwestern coast. President Trump has threatened to bomb or seize the island repeatedly throughout this conflict, and overnight the United States hit targets there again. A U.S. official has confirmed to CNN that American forces struck military targets on Karg Island. Not oil infrastructure, military targets, air defense radars, command nodes, infrastructure protecting the oil facilities, but not the facilities themselves. That distinction matters, because the president has made clear what comes next if his PM Eastern deadline passes without a deal. Every bridge, every power plant, every critical piece of infrastructure across Iran, oil markets reacted immediately. Brent crude jumped more than 3% within minutes of the reports. Some benchmarks rose higher. The global economy is watching this island because if those oil export terminals go offline, the impact goes far beyond Iran. Gulf production is already down, the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, and now the one piece of Iranian energy infrastructure still functioning at scale is under direct threat. This is not the first time the U.S. has struck Karg Island. American forces hit military targets there in mid-March, but this strike comes in a different context. It comes as the clock runs down on a presidential ultimatum. It comes after more than a month of sustained air operations across Iran, and it comes as regional leaders warn publicly that the situation is close to spiraling out of control. A spokesman for Qatar's prime minister and foreign minister held a press conference just as these reports were emerging. His words, "We are close to the point where the situation in the region could spiral out of control." That is Qatar, a U.S. ally, a mediator, a Gulf state with direct stakes in regional stability, saying publicly that this conflict is approaching an inflection point. The deadline is PM Eastern Time tonight. That translates to 3:30 a.m. Wednesday morning in Tehran, a.m. in Abu Dhabi. For the past 24 hours, the region has been on edge, waiting to see whether the president will follow through on his threat or extend the window for negotiations. Vice President G. Vance, speaking in Hungary, suggested that behind-the-scenes talks involving Pakistan, Egypt, Turkey, the United States, and Iran may provide room to push the deadline, but as of now, there is no public indication that a deal is close. There is no sign the Strait of Hormuz will reopen before the clock runs out, and there is no confirmation that the president will back down from what he has described as one of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. Here's what he posted on social media just minutes ago: "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will." However, now that we have complete and total regime change where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionary, yeah, wonderful can happen. Who knows? We will find out tonight, one of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran. That statement is contradictory. It threatens total destruction while expressing hope for regime change and a new Iran. It claims to support the Iranian people while promising to obliterate their infrastructure. It vacillates between apocalyptic language and vague optimism, and it gives no clear indication of what the president will actually do when the deadline arrives. Military analysts are now questioning what the strikes on Karg Island signal about U.S. intentions. If the objective was simply to degrade Iran's military capability, those strikes could have been conducted at any time over the past month, but conducting them now, hours before a major deadline, suggests something more deliberate. One retired Army brigadier general suggested on air that the strikes may be preparatory softening defenses on Karg Island ahead of a potential ground operation. The United States has forces positioned in the region capable of executing such a mission. The 82nd Airborne Division's Immediate Ready Brigade is reportedly pre-positioned. In the theater, possibly in Kuwait, the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit is operating near the mouth of the Persian Gulf. Both units are within striking distance of Karg Island. A ground assault on Karg would be extraordinarily risky. The island is heavily defended. It's in contested waters. Any amphibious or airborne operation would require air superiority, sustained logistics, and the ability to hold ground under fire, and it would almost certainly trigger a wider regional war. But the fact that military targets on the island are being hit now, rather than oil infrastructure, suggests the possibility that the U.S. is preserving the option to seize the island intact rather than destroy it. If the objective were simply to cripple Iran's oil exports, American forces could strike the terminals directly. Instead, they are hitting the defenses around those terminals. That tactical choice raises the question: is the United States preparing to take Karg Island? The island is a trophy asset. It represents more than 90% of Iran's oil revenue. Losing it would be a strategic and economic catastrophe for Tehran, but holding it would require a sustained U.S. military presence in hostile territory, supply lines through contested waters, and a long-term commitment that the Pentagon has not publicly outlined. Meanwhile, the broader air campaign continues. U.S. and Israeli forces have conducted over 11,000 strikes inside Iran since Operation Overwhelming Force began 32 days ago. Despite that volume, American intelligence assesses that nearly half of Iran's ballistic missile stockpile has survived. Mobile launchers remain active. Just before the Karg Island news broke, 3 separate waves of Iranian ballistic missiles were fired toward northern Israel. The tempo has not slowed. Iran is still launching. The launchers are still being reloaded, and the threat to coalition aircraft operating over Iranian territory remains severe. Iran's air defense network has been degraded but not destroyed. Surface-to-air missile systems, anti-aircraft artillery, and even legacy systems can still threaten low and medium-altitude aircraft. Every sortie flown over Iran carries risk, and every strike brings the possibility of escalation. The deadline looming tonight is not just about the Strait of Hormuz. It is about whether the United States will follow through on a threat to destroy civilian infrastructure across an entire country. President Trump has said explicitly that if Iran does not comply, he will hit every bridge and every power plant in the nation. That would be an unprecedented campaign of strategic bombing targeting non-military assets. It would kill civilians, it would cripple essential services, and under international law, it would likely constitute a war crime. Legal experts and retired military officers have raised those concerns publicly. The Nuremberg trials held German leaders accountable for targeting civilian populations during World War II. The Geneva Conventions prohibit attacks on infrastructure essential to civilian survival unless it provides direct military advantage. Bombing every power plant and every bridge in a country of 88 million people would cross that line. The president's own rhetoric acknowledges the stakes. He calls it the death of a civilization. He frames it as a historic inflection point, but he also claims to support the Iranian people and hopes for regime change. That contradiction has created confusion among allies, uncertainty among adversaries, and concern among military planners who are expected to execute orders that may violate the laws of war. Gulf states are watching this deadline with alarm. The United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, all of them depend on regional stability for their economic survival. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed. Oil production across the Gulf has dropped by at least 10 million barrels per day. Energy prices are climbing, and the risk of a wider war that pulls in Gulf states directly is growing. Qatar's public statement that the situation is close to spiraling out of control reflects that fear. These are U.S. allies. They host American military bases. They have facilitated diplomacy, and they are now warning that the conflict is approaching a point of no return. The next 11 hours will determine whether this is the beginning of a negotiated settlement or the start of a campaign that reshapes the Middle East. If the deadline passes and the president follows through on his threat, the consequences will be immediate and severe. Iranian infrastructure will be destroyed, civilian casualties will mount, the global oil market will convulse, and the United States will have committed to a level of warfare not seen since World War II. If the deadline is extended, it will be because talks behind the scenes mediated by Pakistan, Egypt, Turkey, or other intermediaries have produced enough progress to justify more time, but there is no public evidence of that progress yet, no Iranian statement suggesting compliance, no U.S. statement indicating flexibility, just a ticking clock and a threat that grows heavier with every hour. Karg Island is the focal point because it is the leverage. It is the asset Iran cannot afford to lose and the target the United States can hit without triggering immediate retaliation against Gulf allies. Striking the oil terminals there would cripple Iran's economy overnight. Seizing the island would give the U.S. direct control over Iran's energy exports. Either option changes the conflict fundamentally, but neither option ends it. Even if Karg Island falls, Iran still has ballistic missiles, it still has drones, it still has proxy forces across the region. And it still has the ability to make this war long, bloody, and unwinnable. The president has framed tonight as a moment of decision, a crossroads, the end of 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death. But what comes after is unclear. Regime change is not a strategy. It is an outcome, and achieving it requires more than airstrikes and ultimatums. It requires a plan for what replaces the current government, who enforces stability, and how the region avoids descending into chaos. Right now, there is no public plan. There is a deadline. There is a threat. And there is a military force positioned to execute orders that may or may not come. The clock is running, the strikes on Karg Island have begun, and the world is waiting to see whether the president means what he says.